With a single twitch of her nose, she bewitched an entire nation. Elizabeth Montgomery, the radiant star of Bewitched, became America's darling of the 1,960 seconds, a symbol of grace, wit, and feminine charm that defined a generation of television magic. But behind the laughter of millions, there was silence. Behind her sparkling eyes, a haunting loneliness that no spotlight could erase. She was a daughter overshadowed by a controlling father, a woman trapped inside the perfection of a role she could never escape, and a lover betrayed by those she trusted most. What truly happened to the woman who made the world believe in magic, yet couldn't save herself from her own invisible curse? This is the full, never-before-told story of Elizabeth Montgomery. Her secret battles, her heartbreak, and the tragic truth that Hollywood tried to forget. Before she became the world's favorite witch, Elizabeth Montgomery was just a lonely girl growing up in a house filled with applause, but no warmth. Born into Hollywood royalty, she was the daughter of acclaimed actor-director Robert Montgomery and stage actress Elizabeth Allen. To outsiders, the Montgomery household looked like a dream: luxury, prestige, and connections that could open any door in show business. But behind those elegant doors, love was rationed, not given. Robert Montgomery ruled the home with the same precision he demanded on set. Distant, authoritarian, and coldly analytical. He expected perfection, even from a child. When Elizabeth smiled, he corrected her posture. When she cried, he called it weakness. His approval became the currency of her existence, and she would spend a lifetime trying to earn it. Her mother, though gentler, was emotionally absent. A woman who believed good manners mattered more than affection. Their conversations were rehearsed, polite, and utterly hollow. In that silence, young Elizabeth learned her first role: to pretend she was fine. She attended exclusive schools where her last name preceded her, where classmates whispered that she was Hollywood's princess. But in truth, she felt invisible. Acting began as an escape, not ambition. A private rebellion against the indifference surrounding her. When she stepped on stage, she could finally feel something. For a few moments, she wasn't the disappointing daughter. She was someone seen, someone heard. Yet the irony was cruel. The very thing she used to run from her family would one day chain her to another illusion. When Robert learned she wanted to act, he dismissed it coldly, telling her that no daughter of mine will make a fool of herself on camera. Those words, sharp as glass, stayed with her. They would echo years later when critics praised Bewitched, and she wondered if he ever watched. Every great actress hides a wound that fuels her performance. For Elizabeth, it was the endless search for the love she never received at home. That longing, unfulfilled and unspoken, became the invisible force behind her charm, her drive, and eventually, her undoing. Would fame finally fill that emptiness, or would it only make the silence louder? When Elizabeth Montgomery stepped onto the set of Bewitched in 1964, she had no idea her life was about to be divided in two. Before and after the twitch, the world saw Samantha Stevens, the charming suburban witch who could make the impossible happen with a flick of her nose. What they didn't see was Elizabeth, standing just off camera, quietly negotiating with her own ghosts. The show was an instant sensation. Within weeks, Bewitched reached over 25 million viewers. Every household in America tuned in to watch the perfect wife, the perfect smile, the perfect illusion of happiness. Magazines called her television's golden goddess. Children copied her signature twitch. Sponsors poured in millions. But each episode that elevated her stardom pushed her further from herself. Behind the scenes, the glow of success came with invisible bruises. The show's producer, her husband, William Asher, was both her creative partner and her warden. Their marriage began as a collaboration built on admiration. It soon morphed into control, masked as direction. He wanted her on screen not as Elizabeth the woman, but as Samantha the brand. Even her wardrobe, her gestures, her tone of voice were dictated and rehearsed. The irony was cruel. She played a witch with magical freedom, yet off-screen she lived under an unspoken spell. Elizabeth's natural instincts as an actress clashed with the sanitized world of 1,960 seconds television.
Show up here pronto.
She wanted Samantha to be more complex, rebellious, questioning, even angry at times. But the network preferred her domesticated, eternally cheerful. Keep her cute, not controversial, the executives would say. So she smiled, swallowed her frustration, and delivered her lines with flawless grace. It was a performance within a performance, an art form she had unknowingly perfected since childhood. While audiences saw humor and charm, those who worked closest to her began noticing cracks beneath the polish. Between takes, she'd retreat into silence. Sometimes she'd light a cigarette, stare into the studio lights, and mutter, "If only life were as easy as magic." She started arriving early and leaving late, as though work was the only place she could hide from the life she was living. By the 5th season, exhaustion began to replace ambition. She had filmed over 150 episodes, often 6 days a week, juggling motherhood, fame, and a failing marriage. Rumors spread that she wanted to quit, but the contracts were ironclad. And Asher, ever the businessman, reminded her what walking away would cost. So she stayed. For the cameras, for the crew, for the illusion that everything was fine. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she knew that the very thing making her immortal was quietly killing her. The studio lights blinded her to real sunlight. The applause drowned out her own thoughts. Fans adored Samantha's happiness, but Elizabeth felt none of it belonged to her. She once confided to a friend that she feared being stuck forever as the woman with the twitch, a symbol of joy she no longer felt capable of portraying. Still, she gave everything to the role. She fought for subtle moments of humanity in the script. Small gestures, fleeting glances, lines that hinted at Samantha's inner world. Those nuances, invisible to most, were Elizabeth's way of rebelling. It was her coded message to anyone watching closely: I am here. I am more than this smile. When Bewitched finally ended in 1972, after 8 seasons, Elizabeth stood on the final set, surrounded by props that had once defined her life. The cameras stopped rolling, and the silence was deafening. She was 39 years old, adored by millions, yet utterly lost. Fame had given her everything: status, money, legacy, and taken the one thing she always wanted: herself. Walking away from the set for the last time, she reportedly said to a crew member, "I wonder if people will ever know who I really was." It wasn't bitterness. It was grief. The grief of a woman who had given the world magic and received only illusion in return. Her rise had been dazzling, but it was built on quiet sacrifices. Pieces of identity traded for applause. In the eyes of America, she was timeless. But in the mirror, Elizabeth Montgomery saw a woman aging, tired, and still chasing the same thing she had since childhood: the right to be seen as herself. Elizabeth Montgomery believed in love the same way others believe in miracles. Something fragile, pure, and worth suffering for. But in her life, love never healed, it devoured. Every man she let in carried a shadow that mirrored her own, and one by one, they left her emptier than before. Her first marriage to Frederick Gallatin Camman was supposed to be her escape from the cold corridors of her childhood. He was elegant, well-bred, everything her father would approve of. But within months, the marriage cracked. He found her too restless, too ambitious, too much of a woman for the quiet socialite life he wanted. She wasn't the type to sit still and smile, one acquaintance said. When he walked away, he left her with a scar she'd carry for decades. The belief that being herself was always too much for someone to love. Then came Gig Young, a man whose charm could light up a room and whose demons could burn it down. He was an Oscar-winning actor, witty and magnetic, yet deeply broken. Their love began in a whirlwind of passion and ended in the smell of whiskey and shouting behind closed doors. Friends recalled hearing his voice echo down hallways, sharp and slurred, accusing her of things she never did. One witness described verbal abuse that cut deeper than any slap. Elizabeth, ever the professional, hid the bruises no one could see. She believed she could fix him. She couldn't. By the time she walked away in 1963, Gig's alcoholism had hollowed out what was once love. Years later, he would die in a murder-suicide, leaving behind one more ghost to haunt her: her third marriage. To Bewitched producer William Asher was both her sanctuary and her prison. Together, they created television history, but behind the scenes, the lines between husband and director blurred into control. He orchestrated not just her career, but her persona. He wanted her to be America's sweetheart, one colleague remembered, even at home. Elizabeth played along, until she couldn't. The strain of constant scrutiny, the infidelity rumors, and the endless expectations eroded their marriage like slow acid. When she discovered he'd been unfaithful, she didn't scream. She simply shut down. "There are silences," she once said, "that hurt more than any words ever could." It's a Barry, the starred and tested of This of the Bray, and the Lawning. They divorced after a decade, and Hollywood called it amicable. But her friends described something darker. A woman who had given everything to the men in her life and been left with nothing but echoes. She kept choosing men who needed saving, one confidant admitted, because deep down, she was still trying to save her father. It's a Barry, the starred and tested of This of the Bray, and the Lawning. Then came Robert Foxworth, the last man and perhaps the only one who saw her without a mask. They met in the late 1970 seconds, both older, both scarred. He didn't want Samantha the witch, he wanted Elizabeth, the woman. For the first time, she allowed herself to be imperfect, to laugh too loud, to cry without apology. They lived together for nearly 2 decades before marrying in 1993. He was by her side when she took her final breath 2 years later. But even this love, tender and genuine, couldn't undo the damage left behind. By then, Elizabeth had learned that affection often came with a cost: control, compromise, or betrayal. Each heartbreak had built another layer of armor, and behind that armor was the same little girl who once begged her father to see her. She once told a close friend during those later years, "I've spent my whole life acting. On stage, on camera, in love. I wonder who I'd be if I ever stopped performing." It wasn't cynicism. It was confession. By the end of her third marriage, she had mastered the art of emotional invisibility, smiling through the wreckage, charming through the pain. Her heartbreaks weren't scandals splashed across headlines. They were quiet implosions, and that made them all the more devastating. To the world, she was still luminous, graceful, untouchable. But in private, Elizabeth Montgomery was a woman who kept giving love as if it were oxygen, even as it slowly suffocated her. She had bewitched millions with her laughter. But in the stillness of night, when the camera stopped and the applause faded, even she couldn't conjure a spell strong enough to protect her heart. The camera stopped rolling, but Elizabeth Montgomery could never quite step out of the frame. For years after Bewitched ended, the public refused to see her as anyone else. No matter what she did, every new role was haunted by the ghost of Samantha Stevens, the smiling, perfect witch who could fix any problem with a twitch. But Elizabeth had run out of magic. What remained was a woman quietly unraveling beneath the weight of her own legend. In the 1970 seconds, she began choosing darker, riskier projects. Roles that no network executive could label cute. A Case of Rape, 1974, shocked audiences with its raw realism, confronting a subject television had always avoided. She earned an Emmy nomination for it, but more than that, she earned a new identity, a woman unafraid to stare pain in the face. The same year, she portrayed Lizzie Borden in The Legend of Lizzie Borden, a performance so chilling, so precise, that many believe she was exorcising her own demons on screen. Critics called it career-defining. Friends said it was cathartic. In the Brahmins, deal of it id. Yet, away from the spotlight, she was fighting a different kind of darkness. One that didn't need a camera to exist. After her divorce from William Asher, Elizabeth retreated from the Hollywood machine. She stopped attending parties, declined interviews, and built a quieter life with Robert Foxworth. But peace was not the same as healing. Decades of repression, failed love, and emotional isolation had carved invisible wounds. Those close to her spoke of long nights filled with cigarettes and silence. She could sit in a room for hours, one friend recalled, barely saying a word, as if she were waiting for something, or someone, that never came. She rarely spoke about her childhood or her father. When pressed, she'd deflect with humor. But occasionally, after a few glasses of wine, she would whisper, "He never thought I was enough." That sentence, more than any illness, was the slow poison of her life. By the early 1992, she was aging gracefully in public. But privately, her body was giving up. She began losing weight rapidly, dismissing it as stress. When she finally saw a doctor, the news was grim: advanced colorectal cancer. The disease had spread silently, invisibly, much like the emotional pain she'd carried all her life. From diagnosis to death, only 8 weeks passed. 8 weeks to say goodbye, to make peace, to decide what mattered. Friends remember how calm she was, almost serene. She refused aggressive treatment. She didn't want to die under fluorescent hospital lights, surrounded by machines. "I've spent my whole life being directed," she told Robert Foxworth. "This time, I'll direct the ending myself." So she went home, surrounded by her children, her husband, and a few close friends. No cameras, no makeup, no twitch. Just Elizabeth. In those final days, she often sat by the window, sunlight spilling across her face. She seemed to exist between two worlds. The woman who once bewitched millions, and the fragile soul who had finally stopped performing. To a friend who visited her near the end, she said softly, "Maybe I was never bewitched. Maybe I was just tired." It was not self-pity, it was surrender. Her death on the 18th of May, 1995, shocked the public. Newspapers called it sudden. Fans mourned as though they'd lost a family member. But few realized how deliberate her exit had been. She didn't want obituaries filled with her TV magic. She wanted silence, the kind that had always eluded her in life. In retrospect, her illness feels symbolic, a cruel echo of her emotional state. Colon cancer, often linked to long-term stress and unexpressed anger, is a disease of what's held inside. And Elizabeth Montgomery had spent a lifetime holding everything in. The pressure to be perfect, to please, to smile. The unspoken rage toward a father who never said, "I'm proud of you." The exhaustion of carrying a character the world refused to let die. In a tragic sense, her body became the final stage, expressing what her voice never could. Even after death, Hollywood tried to rewrite her. Tributes focused on Bewitched, rarely mentioning her later work or the battles she fought beyond the camera. But time has begun to shift that narrative. Modern critics now see her as a pioneer. One of the first women in television to push against censorship, to demand layered female characters, to break the mold of pretty and obedient. In the Zother Assumption by Benning and Risand, there's a haunting poetry in how her story mirrors the evolution of women in Hollywood itself. In the 1960 seconds, she embodied the illusion of domestic bliss. By the 1970 seconds, she was fighting for the right to be seen as complex, flawed, real. And in the end, she became a cautionary tale about the cost of living your life as someone else's idea of perfection. Elizabeth's legacy isn't just her charm or beauty. It's her quiet defiance. She fought for authenticity long before it was fashionable, and she paid dearly for it. Today, her story feels like an unfinished conversation. A reminder that behind every shining icon lies a human being quietly bleeding beneath the applause. In one of her last interviews, she was asked if she believed in magic. She smiled, that same familiar smile millions remembered, and said, "Magic is just belief made visible. I've spent my whole life believing in everyone else. Maybe it's time someone believed in me." In this other reception by Benning and Risand, that was the real Elizabeth Montgomery. No spells, no illusions, just truth. And maybe that's the cruelest part of her story. The world fell in love with her magic, but never stayed long enough to see her humanity.